Welcome to Channel AMEC, your insight to the Australian visa system. Good day everyone, my name is Carl Young, your online YouTube visa consultant. Are you interested about migrating to Australia? Why don't you consider to subscribe to my channel and turn on the little bell on the side so once we have all the updates and news, you'll be the first one getting all the insight. Today's video, we would like to take you a little bit of a close look on what's happening in the Shanghai lockdown. Now, you probably have seen that in the news. And what is it about? How would that relate to Australia visa? Now, I've taken a closer look of all the recent month plus news in regards to the lockdown in Shanghai and how they have treated the citizens of Shanghai in a very, should I say, inhumane way. Now, would that actually meet the requirement of Subclass 866 protection visa? Now, it's a very interesting topic because I don't think anyone had actually talked about this of yet. However, I do believe there is a ground to do so. Obviously, the government of Australia is currently very busy in regards to the election campaign. And after all the elections resolved and done, I believe there will be a potential way. But provided those citizens of Shanghai or elsewhere in China will be able to have the right visa and arrive in Australia. Now let's have a look at Subclass 866, which I have previously done a video in regards to this visa. Well, not particularly targeting and assisting on the citizen in Shanghai, but was all a general overview. Now, the visa obviously is for refugee. There is a certain definition in regards to refugee. Obviously, under the law regulations, it needs to meet what it's on the right on the top of my head right here, under the Australian protection obligation. Now obviously that will go through the United Nations and things like that, but that perhaps will not be a way how the Shanghai citizens, if they had been subjected to a cruelty lockdown during this month also, or perhaps more, don't know how that would happen. Obviously a lot of people will come and say, look, this is more about public health of the nation. However, we have seen a lot of footages that yes, it's caused by public health concern, but how they have been treating the citizen there perhaps has already been a bit too over and cross the boundary to meet this subclass 866 criteria. So in regard in detail, how we can actually see, how check whether or not they actually meet those kind of requirements. So obviously they're being locked into their home, they cannot exit, and the access to the food is sometimes in a very extreme scenario. If you haven't seen those one, perhaps just Google, YouTube, search a little bit. You probably you find a lot of footage like this, or being beaten up for some sort of what they call it uncooperated conducts. So any of this, and a lot of them has been, even if that they are not being catching COVID, Omicron, should I say, they are being subject to put into a quarantine situation. Is this somewhat triggering the criteria in order to actually meet subclass 166 protection visa? Let's have a look. So in regards to this one, we will take you to Legend.com, which is the law library for immigration law. So this obviously on the top it says you see all the 866 criteria. There is not really not much to actually read about. It's basically saying protection visa subclass 866. So the applicant, which is going to be the visa holder or visa applicant, need to claim that the criteria meet paragraph 36 to A or double A. We'll go in there, have a look. That is the main thing that we need to check. All the other regulation basically are talking about whether they are their families, and you see the differences between this one. Why are they calling the same paragraph in two different sections? So 866.211, it says the paragraph 36 to A and AA, and then in here they are doubling up again, because the differences here is at the time of application, and this is at the time of decision. So what does that mean? That means if at the time of application that you are still subject to that harm restriction, of course, it may be different between when you apply and you wait for a couple months down the track. You have already received different treatment, and you're not longer you're not longer subjected to all this quarantine and lockdown treatments. Then perhaps you won't meet this requirement, and Australia will not provide you subclass 1666 visa. So what does paragraph 36 actually says? It's actually very, very important, because that's the key to this visa application. All the other parts is about medical checkup, because some people, they coming from a war zone, for example, people coming from Ukraine, right? They were coming from war zone. It's very hard to identify them. We don't know their medical status, so there's a lot of other different kind of checking there. But look, I'm not a doctor, so that's not my tale of expertise. You're required to meet the medical requirement anyway. So my focus is more on paragraph 36. Let's have a look 36 now. Jumping to section 36, and we talk about 2A, right? 2A and double A. So then this part is the most important part of protection visa, which I have explained it previously. Now, it doesn't just restrict to those situations in Shanghai. Obviously, there's a lot of things happening all around the world, but again, you are required to arrive in Australia lawfully in order to lodge this visa, because there will be other offshore protection visa mechanism, which I'm not going to talk about that today, but I'm more towards depicting whether or not the situation of those citizens in Shanghai actually meet these protection visa criteria. Now, have a look. So this is what section 36 paragraph 2. A criterion for protection visa is that the applicant for this visa is, so this, let's have a look. Legally, we're looking at the logic here, is at the end of the sentence is or, so it's optional. So either it's going to be A, the applicant is a non-citizen of Australia, so obviously, in who the minister is satisfied that Australia has protection obligation because the person is a refugee. Now, who actually meet these kind of requirements? Obviously, you've seen those about 3,000 or 4,000 Ukrainians arrive in Australia. They will meet this requirement because Australia as a nation has announced that obviously they can condemn those actions and conducts of Russian aggressions into Ukraine. So those Ukrainians arrive in Australia will actually meet this Australia's protection obligation. Obviously, you've seen that news all around the world. Now, what if there is no obligation there? So somebody have the visa, perhaps like people escaping from Shanghai, and come to Australia with a visitor visa or so whatnot, well, perhaps student visa even. Okay, a non-citizen in Australia, other than the non-citizen mentioned in paragraph A, which is going to be this one. This one is obviously a national recognized refugee. Okay, in respect of whom minister. So minister basically in the immigration regulation will meant the visa, the case officer. Okay, is satisfied Australia has protection obligation because the minister has substantial ground for believing that as necessary and foreseeable consequences of a non-citizen being removed from Australia to a receiving country, there's a real risk of non-citizen will be suffer significant harm. So obviously, the key here that we're looking for is there will be a substantial ground for the minister, for the case officer, for the immigration officer to believe. So there will be enough information. If it's not enough, obviously you'll be rejected. But if there is enough information to identify you and understand that you're in the such situation with all this information, and that if Australia do not accept you and put you back to the receiving country, so obviously whatever the passport that you hold, they will put you back and send you back home, right? There is a real risk of this person will suffer significant harm. So the second key here is we're talking about significant harm. Whether or not a lockdown such as what they have done in Shanghai will meet the definition of significant harm. Let's have a look. So significant harm's definition is right down here. So let's have read. It says a non-citizen will suffer significant if he or she will be arbitrarily deprived of his or her life, meaning put them into a jail. Okay? Now, whether or not you describe a lockdown like this is depriving their life, potentially, yes. That's exactly what's happening. They were told their only a lockdown will be 3 days, 7 days, or 2 weeks. Now it's 40-something days. Some people there has been there for 2 months. How do we know when they can actually be this will be lifted? The lockdown will be lifted. They don't know. Okay, we will avoid the death penalty. I don't think anyone will go back into a death penalty, but I think whether or not this lockdown is subject to like a torture or cruel, inhumane treatment or punishments. Now, it may meet this kind of requirement because if we simply just think about how that definition, plain meaning of those words, if you're treating those citizens back home locked down with very scarcity of food to be delivered, a lot of these people actually go into gardens and pick up those grass or whatever the plants for food. Now that's cruelty, okay? And non-citizen was subject to degrading treatment or punishment. So that's actually already been happening there. So personally, I think reading through this with significant harm's definitions, perhaps a lot of these citizens in Shanghai is already meeting those kind of criteria. Now, the question back is whether or not they have the right visa to exit out of Shanghai. And I noticed there has been footage and news and video coming out in regards to the custom border in China. They even destroy your passport, enabling those citizens to actually travel out of China. And that's causing a lot of issue there. So again, this is just basically a explanation, as I have saw a lot of footage going on over the past a month or so. I truly believe that those conducts has been conducted in Shanghai in lockdown situation has actually met a lot of criterias as the definition of a significant harm, and thus if one can actually escape out of those situations, perhaps they will actually meet those requirements to actually apply for subclass 866 protection visa. Anyway, should you have more question query, more than welcome to leave a comment right down below. I'll see you next video. Goodbye.